So normally I don't start by reading from my books because that would send everybody running out. And the other problem is that in this particular case, I read the audiobook of my own book, which was a grueling experience. And after I was done with it, I said, who wrote this thing? Because the sentences are so long and convoluted, and I made a pledge that I was going to both write with shorter sentences in the future and speak with shorter sentences, and so I'll at least achieve the former. So I was looking at the book today, and I was trying to think if there was something that capsulized exactly what I wanted to say, and that means it's got to be a couple of paragraphs, and it's got to be saying what I want to say. So here it is. Today, if you are a pilot, ham radio operator, doctor, veterinarian, nurse, medic, emergency anything, ambulance driver, firefighter, police officer, sheriff, constable, deputy, park ranger, demolitions expert, aid worker, lifeguard, heavy equipment operator, utility lineman, trucker, bus driver, merchant mariner, port operator, stevedore, epidemiologist, biologist, agronomist, hydrologist, undertaker, community planner, civil engineer, mechanic, information technician, hacker, cyber geek, linguist, fish and wildlife specialist, dispatcher, security guard, technical climber, search and rescue expert, dog handler, dog lover, or dog. There is a place for you in Homeland Security. And on virtually every inch of the political spectrum, we demand this. We demand preparedness and security today. So government bureaucrats and federal agents and Homeland Security officials and military commanders forge these trigger-taut relationships with states and cities, counties, tribes, and local governments. Everyone marching to the national security beat, utilities, telecommunications, the information technology industry, hospitals, the transportation sector, they're all deputized into government, public-private partnerships. Worst-case protocols are fed to corporations, universities, fraternal associations, nonprofits, and faith-based organizations. Tens of millions of volunteers are signed up, vetted, credentialed, fitted out. Networks of listeners, watchers, and sniffers are employed, all recording, saving, and panning for gold. Nary is a dispatch issued, nary a press release or a regulation goes out, nary an official speech is made without the new national lexicon, information sharing, unified command, unity of effort, whole of government, whole of community, whole of society. So is anyone left who is just a civilian today? So that pretty much says it all. And when I think about the gulf that exists between Washington and this new enlisted conglomeration of Homeland Security, intelligence, law enforcement, military, government, and try to put some meaning to it, I came up with this idea of martial life, that we live under a state of martial life. It's not martial law in the sense that there's some uniformed guardian who has taken over the government. It's a conglomeration of Homeland Security, of intelligence, of the law enforcement world, of the military, of the national security community, the government, emergency responders. And it makes national security, more than anything else, the most important subject. So that even like last week when we watched the shutdown of the federal government, who was exempt? The intelligence community, the Homeland Security apparatus, the military. And it transforms the private sector and civil society into a kind of national security mess, which is to say that if you run a utility, you have to comply with federal rules that mostly have to do with things like keeping that utility strong and safe, which are, of course, defined in very military and national security terms. So I talked to a friend of mine who lives in the state of Vermont, and he's a top-level planner, and I said, does anybody care about this? And he said, you know, actually in the state of Vermont, a lot of emergency planners are worried about the electrical grid. That's one area where we are concerned. And I said, so what are you doing to make it stronger? And it just totally halted him, because he said, we're just preparing for the day it goes down. We're doing nothing to make it stronger. Nothing. And that's just a little microcosm of understanding what happens when everything is about national security. The weight moves over to a kind of preparedness for disaster, for war, as opposed to creating a more resilient civil society. I call that reality American coup. So today I went online because I always want to check when I say more national security and military people are doing better economically. So just let me give you some numbers that are in this book that you're going to buy. First, 7 of the richest 15 counties in America are in the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area. And about 60% of all of the job openings in America are in the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area today. 60%. That's by going to monster.com and a couple of other job boards. And you'll be glad to know that that the most valuable commodity is having a top secret security clearance. It's like a commodity because that's what you sell yourself on the basis of, that you have one of these things. So next week I'm speaking at an ACLU Vermont conference in Montpelier, and I thought, well, I'll look up how many jobs there are open right now in Vermont looking for people with top secret clearances. And I'm happy to report that the top 7 out of the top 10 jobs open in Vermont now, when you do a search of Vermont and secret, are at Victoria's Secrets. So we haven't quite been destroyed yet. Now, I want, though, to share with you something else about Vermont and about the world we live in. So I get a knock on the door of my home in South Pomfret. And this guy says, you don't know me, but I live in North Pomfret, and I've wanted to come by for quite some time. You know, I'm sorry, I haven't read your books. Lots of intro, and I'm wondering, 9/11 Truth Committee. But he says, I said, yeah, okay, I'm being very nice, and that's hard for me. And he says, I spoke to the store manager, and he said, go on over there and tell him what you know. And he said, so I was driving by your house one day, and I saw these 2 surveillance vehicles out in front of it. And I know that you do something in the national security field, and I don't want to be a conspiracy nut, and I don't want